Paul Edwards. I'm an independently published horror author, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Today I'm reading Monster World Magazine, issue number 7 from 1965. And no, you're not seeing things. I am wearing a shirt with this magazine cover on it. You haven't lost your mind, or at least this isn't evidence that you've lost your mind. I guess whether you have lost your mind or not, I wouldn't know. But while we're waiting to figure that out, I thought you might enjoy going through this vintage monster magazine with me page by page, and together we can find out what kind of monster kid goodness there is in here. We've got the magazine out of its protective plastic. Monster World Magazine, issue number 7 from 1965. It's as old as I am. That's the same year I'm from. 35-cent cover price. Special bonus this issue, Son of Frankenstein, complete with rare pictures. And we have a great artist's rendition of a scene from Son of Frankenstein with Igor, the Frankenstein monster, and Wolfgang Frankenstein, played by Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and Basil Rathbone. Okay, let's dive right in. Whoa. Well, we're starting right off with It, the Terror from Beyond Space. Okay. Table of contents. 1965, so it's no surprise that they have an article on Ghidra, the three-headed monster. That was the American version of King Ghidorah, a Japanese movie where Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra all had to join forces to defeat a new enemy, a space monster, three-headed space monster, King Ghidorah. And here we go. For some reason in the American release, they called it Ghidra, not Ghidorah. They cut an O out there. But there's King Ghidorah in all his glory. 3 heads are better than 1. Consistently, in polls of fans of Godzilla and related movies, Godzilla always comes in as everyone's favorite monster, but number 2 almost always is King Ghidorah. It's either King Ghidorah or Mothra that takes that spot every time they ask. And of course, here's Rodan, infant form Mothra, and Godzilla. You notice in this picture, Ghidorah is a bit bigger in proportion to the other monsters than he would be in later movies. In fact, by the 90s, they had a movie where Godzilla went against King Ghidorah one-on-one because they made Godzilla bigger. That's a story for another day. Nice. These were common to do in the 1960s. They took real images from the movie and then touched up the still images to make these publicity shots. So, for example, this is a real shot of Godzilla from the movie and a real shot of King Ghidorah. But this exact scene didn't happen in the movie. There's Ghidorah terrorizing Tokyo, as all good monsters do. So, Ghidra, the three-headed monster, is considered by some to be where the Godzilla movies started to go wrong, or at least take a direction that was less impressive than the first 4. It was a little more kid-friendly. And it was a good foreshadowing of the way that the Godzilla movies would end up being, where they became huge wrestling matches, monster versus monster. Okay, an ad for Erie. You know, it's interesting because in these magazines, they would list upcoming movies, and with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that sometimes they were right on the money, but sometimes they were not. So, for example, they say here, upcoming movies. Remember, this is 1965. Daghora the Space Monster, that did come out. That's also called Space Amoeba. In America, in some markets, it was released as Daggora the Space Monster. Godzilla versus the Giant Devilfish. I don't even know what that is. It certainly is not a Godzilla movie that ever came out. It might have been an early draft of Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, but that is just a guess. I do not know. And King Kong versus Frankenstein. That, of course, never happened. That probably is referring to Frankenstein Conquers the World, is what the project ended up being. Although that came out this same year, 1965, so they should have been on top of what the current title of the movie was. And it was in America by 1966. So, could it be a reference to War of the Gargantuas already being planned? I do not know. If you have any information on that, please let me know in the comments. Because King Kong versus Frankenstein obviously never happened. But that was the seed of the idea for what we know as Frankenstein Conquers the World. And King Kong didn't make the final cut, of course. Basil Rathbone. Okay, that's an interesting picture. Whoa, this is a publicity still. That was Vincent Price, although now he's melted. Yep, poor Mr. Valdemar. That's from an anthology film called Poe's Tales of Terror, where they did vignettes of different Edgar Allan Poe stories. Basil Rathbone again. And of course, they're building up to the fact that we're going to get a Son of Frankenstein spread. This is a well-circulated publicity picture from Son of Frankenstein. This is from Queen of Blood, which was a 1960s sci-fi horror movie. Very, very similar in principle to the 1979 movie Alien, the Ridley Scott one. I'm not saying it's as good, but it's the same idea. People trapped aboard a spaceship with a very hungry monster picking them off one by one. Basil Rathbone had a small part in this. Small. Okay, somebody asked to see the 1940s version Phantom of the Opera unmasked. Brace yourself. This is Herbert Lom playing the Phantom of the Opera. They call him the Fiend Lom of the Opera. That's the kind of pun that Forrest J. Ackerman used in these magazines. I do like this. May your new year be out of this monster world. Signed, Herbert Lom. That was kind of cool of him, considering the magazine is Monster World. This was a sister publication to Forrest J. Ackerman's famous Monsters of Filmland. Okay, now we're coming to the main event. Son of Frankenstein. Son of Frankenstein on his own is pretty good, but one reason that it's prominent in horror movie history is that this is where they started to create a new cycle of the Universal monster films. So in the early 30s, we had Dracula with Bela Lugosi, Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, The Mummy with Boris Karloff, and Bride of Frankenstein. Those were the most prominent of the Universal horror films that were made during that time. And then the horror cycle sort of died off for a few years. And in 1939, they wanted to reboot it. They didn't have the word reboot, but that's what it was. They wanted to start up a new cycle of monster movies. And they began with this one, Son of Frankenstein. So by analogy, if you're into comics, you know that one showcase issue from 1956 where the Silver Age of comics is considered to have started when they rebooted The Flash, the character of The Flash. That's basically what this was for the world of vintage monster movies. It was the movie that set off a whole new cycle that went well into the 1940s. So here we have three greats of horror. Boris Karloff came back to play the Frankenstein monster for the third and final time. He had been the monster in Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. Basil Rathbone, probably most remembered to us as having played Sherlock Holmes a zillion times in the movies and on radio. And Bela Lugosi, the man who played Dracula in the 1931 film, a lot of people associate Bela Lugosi mostly with the role of Dracula, but you could easily make a case that his best performance on film was as Igor in two films, this one and the sequel to this, Ghost of Frankenstein. By the way, Igor is the most successful retcon ever in movie history. There was no Igor in the 1931 Frankenstein. There was a brutish assistant, but he wasn't named Igor. And in Bride of Frankenstein, there was a different brutish assistant, although played by the same guy, Dwight Frye, but he wasn't Igor either. In this film, they introduce Igor, and they pretend that Igor has been there the whole time. Oh, yes, we know, Igor, you assisted my father in his experiments. No, he didn't. Not in the Universal canon, but they were changing the canon. That's what a retcon is, retroactive continuity. And now we're acting as if Igor had been there the whole time for the events of the first two movies. So if you're watching a video like this, you've probably seen this film, but in case you haven't, and you definitely should, Basil Rathbone returns to his ancestral home, the Frankenstein estate, and discovers that Igor is still alive, living on the property, and that he is keeping the comatose Frankenstein monster. A big surprise to the son of Frankenstein, not such a big surprise to us because there wouldn't be a movie without him. But he works on the monster, tries to revive him, and there's a scene where he is studying the Frankenstein monster, who's only half awake, and trying to understand and reconstruct exactly what it was that his father did to create the monster. And as he's studying the monster, he finds everything about him is completely unhuman. His blood is different, his cell structure is different, everything about him is different from human anatomy. Which is kind of a cool, creepy scene, but it really doesn't make any sense in the continuity of Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, where the monster was basically just made of sewn together corpse parts. I know that in the novel Frankenstein, Mary Shelley was specifically not going into details about how the monster was created, but in the films they committed to this, that he was sewn together by body parts. So why he would have different blood, different cell structures, I don't know. Probably thinking way too much about it. Nice. This is a publicity picture. This scene didn't happen in the movie. But Lionel Atwill, who usually plays a bad guy, did get to play the good guy in this movie, or one of the good guys. He was the police inspector who was trying to solve the series of murders. And what happened in the film, this isn't a spoiler, this is basic to the story. Of course, Wolfgang Frankenstein revives his father's creation, and he expects the monster to obey him, but instead, guess what? The monster obeys Igor, and Igor sends the monster out to do his evil bidding and get revenge on the members of the jury that had sentenced him to die years ago. This is a great scene where Wolfgang Frankenstein is in the lab, the ruins of the lab. The monster comes up behind him unexpectedly, and Wolfgang is terrified that the monster is here, and mostly the monster is concerned by the fact that Wolfgang looks like an ordinary human being, and the monster knows he doesn't by looking in this mirror. And he gets very agitated until Igor arrives to calm him down. The castle in Son of Frankenstein looks nothing like the castle in Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. It's a far-out design. Honestly, I've never been crazy about the castle design in this. I prefer just a basic Gothic castle for the Frankenstein monster. Nothing experimental. You know, it's funny because as a kid, I had the impression that every Frankenstein movie ended with the castle being blown up or burned down, and then somehow the castle was back together again at the beginning of the next movie. As an adult, I know that's not true. What was destroyed in the first Frankenstein was a windmill. In Bride of Frankenstein, it was the Watchtower. In this film, the castle isn't destroyed at all. In Ghost of Frankenstein, this castle is destroyed, and then the mansion burns down. The mansion of the other son of Frankenstein burns down at the end of that one. And then in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, they're in the ruins of this castle. And in... no, that's not true. I stand corrected. In Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, they're in the ruins of the house that belonged to the second son of Frankenstein, played by Lionel Atwill. It wasn't this one. Oh, I caught myself. Okay. Oh. This picture speaks for itself. Well, of course, Igor doesn't appreciate the son of Frankenstein interfering with his plans for the monster. And Wolfgang Frankenstein ends up having to shoot and kill Igor. Although if you think Igor is dead, you got another thing coming. But the monster thinks he's dead. And he lets out a horrifying wail when he discovers his one and only friend has been killed. But don't worry, he'll be back in the next picture. These were about the only scenes in this movie where Karloff really got to show his acting chops. The scenes where he's mourning for Igor, and let me go back. The scene where he is confronting Ludwig Frankenstein, looking at himself and, not Ludwig, Wolfgang Frankenstein, where he's looking at Wolfgang Frankenstein in the mirror and comparing the human face to his face. Those were the only two scenes in this picture where Boris Karloff really got a chance to shine. I'm not saying he wasn't good in the rest of it. He was good, but he didn't really have an opportunity to show off his acting skills because the role was more limited. In fact, this is why Karloff stopped doing Frankenstein movies, because he felt that the monster was becoming too much of a watered-down version of what it had been, that it was just a hulking brood. This is a pretty good fake out. If you've seen this movie, I'm sure you'll remember this. He with his friend Igor dead, he decides the next best thing is he's going to make friends with Wolfgang Frankenstein's little boy, Peter. So he takes him into his lair, and it looks like he's going to throw him into the sulfur pit, but of course he's not. He's taking him up the ladder. Inspector Krogh to the rescue, played by Lionel Atwill. It's a good shot of Lionel Atwill. A lot of times he played mad scientists, and he famously played Professor Moriarty in one of Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes movies. But here he's a good guy. And what happens, spoiler alert for a 90-year-old movie, what happens is that Wolfgang Frankenstein swings into the rescue and rescues his son by kicking the monster into the sulfur pit, which seems to be the end of the monster. This is a good shot of the interior of the castle. This shows you what the castle is like. These crazy staircases, I never have liked this look inside the castle in Son of Frankenstein. It's a good publicity shot of Boris. Even monsters get to party, you know. All right, here's a piece. It tells us right up front this is going to be about Christopher Lee. Yet, here's the Boris Karloff Frankenstein monster. Go figure. But this is true. Christopher Lee did get to play in the Hammer films. He played Karras, the mummy, the Frankenstein monster and Count Dracula countless times. This is from Blood of the Vampire. This is not a Christopher Lee movie. Christopher Lee's not in this. It's also not a Hammer movie, although it's in the same style as Hammer. And this is from Brides of Dracula, which Christopher Lee also was not in. This is Christopher Lee as the Frankenstein monster. They didn't have the rights to use the same Frankenstein monster makeup that had been used in the Universal film. So Hammer had to come up with a completely different look for their Frankenstein monster. This is from Curse of Frankenstein. Nice. This is from Revenge of Frankenstein. Artwork from Revenge of Frankenstein. And now we're starting to get into everyone's favorite part of these magazines, the ads. Blazing Combat. Get issue number 1 with this coupon. Well, if it hasn't come out yet, how do you know it's going to be any good? Get a 1-year subscription with this coupon. $2 for a 1-year subscription. Nice. All right, if you were a monster kid, and by the way, this is 1965, so this was the first wave of monster kids, the ones that got in on the ground floor. You could enter a makeup contest, which is something monster kids absolutely would do. Before, after. So what you did was, it wasn't just that you made up your own makeup. You bought their makeup kit. Send me the official contest professional makeup kit. You bought their makeup kit, and then you did makeup for yourself, took a picture of yourself, and sent it in to enter the contest. So it's not just that you can make up your own makeup effects at home. You had to buy their product to do it. That's a pretty good gimmick, I guess. Missing a page. There we go. Okay. Upcoming projects. Upcoming movies, TV shows that are monster related. Already in this, they're talking about science fiction conventions. That certainly grew. Fang mail. Okay. Kids would write in talking about their favorite monsters, asking for articles or information on certain movies or certain performers. More monster makeup. Yikes. You get your own Venus flytrap. Your monster gloves and socks, or monster hand and foot. You can wear those with your monster mask. You get a monster fly, a Dracula rubber bat, a human skeleton. Wow. Try explaining that to your mom. Human skeleton. Wow. Amazing. Creepy magazine. Movies, but these were not complete movies. These were a few minutes of footage that you would play on a home movie projector, because there were no VCRs or DVDs yet. You could get a few minutes of a monster movie, and in some cases, that was probably all you wanted if you were, a 9-year-old kid. You could easily pick out 10 minutes from Rodan from 1956. You could probably pick out 10 minutes of I Was a Teenage Werewolf. That would be the time periods that kids would want out of it. These are very collectible now. Frankenstein's Flivver and the Mummy's Chariot. There was also a Dracula one and a Wolfman one. The Wolfman wagon, I remember. I forget what the Dracula one was called, I'm ashamed to admit. But there were cars that were themed on each of the big four Universal monsters. Or you could just skip all that and just buy your own guillotine for 98 cents. Who else wants a live monkey? I don't know why this kind of toy sold. I really don't. I understand exactly why these sold. Because they look like the monsters look on your TV screen or in the movie theater. This doesn't look anything like the Frankenstein monster really looks in the movies. It's all kidified. I wouldn't have wanted that when I was a kid. I would have wanted one that looks like the character on the screen. Human skull. This is how much thought they put into these. Okay, they're selling you more movies that you can show at home. They're selling you The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is good. But the picture here is from a different silent horror film. This is from Nosferatu. You can get back issues of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which was the parent publication. In later issues, when they would show the back issues, they would be tiny, and because there were a zillion of them, row after row after row. Here you got a pretty good look at them. Real cannons can be heard 5 miles. Wow. For those about to rock, we salute you. Or you can get a werewolf siren ring. Ants, real ones too, in their own ant farm. What else would they be? Real rocket. Oh, pretty good looking Munsters model kit. Over 10 inches high. $1.98. Rubber monster masks are one of these things that looked good in the ads. The problem is actually wearing one is a pain. You can only wear it for a couple of minutes and then it starts getting too hot in there. So kudos to you if you were ever able to wear a full head rubber mask like a trick-or-treating or something. I couldn't do it. They do look good though. And there were a lot of them. Back to selling reels of film. Again, not from the whole movie. Son of Frankenstein. I'm not surprised they sell that one here because they just ran a big spread on it. The Deadly Mantis. That was a pretty good giant bug movie. Curse of the Demon is a good British occult thriller. And it influenced Drag Me to Hell. It's the same basic premise, not the same tone of film, I'm not saying that, but it's the same premise as Drag Me to Hell. The guy's been cursed by an evil magician. He's gonna be dragged to hell by a demon in X number of days unless he can find a way to defeat the curse. The Giant Claw is not a good film. The Giant Claw makes The Deadly Mantis look like, Masterpiece Theater. This is not a typo. There was a movie called Dinosaur Russ, which had 2 different dinosaurs and a caveman. The caveman stole the show. Okay, Blob. Oh, a spy camera. Wow. And here you can get back issues of Monster World, because this is issue number 7. Here's the first 6. Now on the back cover, Hollywood Masks. Wow. These ones do look good. Yep. All right. Hey, listen, thanks a lot for spending some time with me going through this vintage monster magazine. If you are a fan of classic monsters and vintage horror, you'll love my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. They're available on Amazon.com. And they're available in ebook, paperback, a few of them are in hardcover, and they're available in audiobook. My name again is Paul Edwards. Thanks a lot for spending time looking through this great magazine with me, and I will see you in Mourner's Woods.